Hi everyone, me again. So we are expecting a good turnout for this event, and as you can see, there's already a lot of people here. If you are at the end of the aisles, if you could move in as much as possible towards the center to help people who are coming in a little bit later than yourself. So please, if you are at the end of the aisle, if you could move in towards the center. Thank you.
Yeah, because of the project.
Hey, let me ask you a question. You already know everybody here, right? That's the zero. You left the zero. You give me that call. You want me to give you try to give you 50? That's how it is. Oh, yeah. Read it?
really just like this.
These stories on the PM, it's like, I can't believe it.
Yeah.
So, jewelry, dress, still give me a tip. And the one who took it, so he took it, right? I can't like cover their quality. This is our national plan. How do you do that? There's something Stories on the PM together. It's 5 o'clock in front of Skyview. Store. Surgery. First I ever had problems. Somebody got these. I don't know. No, there isn't. I'd like to, yeah. I'm thinking like, yeah, exactly.
Good evening. I'd like to ask that everybody take their seats as we will be getting started in just a couple minutes. Thank you. Good evening. And on behalf of our host organizations, I would like to welcome all of you to this candidate forum for New York's Congressional District Number 6. My name is Stephen Choi, and I am the Executive Director of the MinKwon Center for Community Action, and I will be serving as tonight's moderator. 2012 is a very important year in New York state politics. All 27 of New York's congressional districts will be up for grabs this year, as well as every single New York State legislative district. And of course, we will have a presidential election in November as well. This year's elections will be an extremely valuable opportunity for citizens and residents here in New York, not only to hear from candidates, but also to make their voices heard as well. And that is why we are here today. I would like to thank the host organizations, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund, Asian Americans for Equality, Common Cause New York, the MinKwon Center for Community Action, the New York Immigration Coalition, OCA New York, the NAACP, and Taking Our Seat. They've all worked hard to make this event possible tonight. And we have been joined here tonight by 5 candidates in alphabetical order: Evergreen Chow, Dan Halloran, Rory Lansman, Grace Meng, and Robert Mittman. Elizabeth Crowley had confirmed, but she has not been able to be here yet tonight. These candidates are running in both the June 26th primary and, if successful, in the November 6th general election as well. I would like to remind everyone that this is a completely nonpartisan public forum. We are not allowing any campaign materials in this hall, and we ask that the campaigns respect this as well. This forum is designed and held for the public's benefit and not for the candidates. And for tonight, we have a distinguished panel of community leaders who will be asking questions ranging from the economy and jobs, immigration policy, healthcare reform, education, and budget and tax policy. Each candidate will get the opportunity to answer every question. We ask that all the candidates provide clear, concise answers that respond directly to the questions that are being asked, and to provide specifics if possible. Each candidate will be given 1.5 minutes to answer. Candidates will also be provided with 2 minutes for an opening statement and 2 minutes for a closing statement as well. I will be strictly enforcing this time limit to be fair to all candidates, no exceptions. And for the audience, we ask that you hold all applause until the end, after the candidates' closing statements. So please hold all applause until the end, and we will strictly enforce this rule as well. We do have translation services available in several languages. If you have the equipment, Channel I is for Chinese, Channel B is for Korean, Channel C is for Hindi, and Channel J is for Bengali. So we do have translation equipment available at the desk, and you can sign that out, but it must be returned at the end of the event. We also have provided materials so that audience members may write down questions for the candidates. We will be collecting these until 7 o'clock p.m. You may hand these to any of the ushers who are in the aisles or anyone wearing a MinKwon Center t-shirt. These questions will then be reviewed and selected to be asked after the panel has finished their questions. And in return, we ask that the audience be respectful to the candidates. And any audience members who disrupt this event will be asked to leave immediately. So with that, we would like to ask our first candidate, Mr. Evergreen Chow, who has been chosen alphabetically to start with his opening statement. Mr. Chow, 2 minutes, please. 2 minutes.
Does it stand? Does it make a difference?
You can either stand or you can speak sitting down. It's up to you. Hello, can you hear me?
Good evening, sisters and brothers. My name is Evergreen Joe, running on the Green Party line. The Green Party is a party of peace and social and economic justice. Right now, I hope many of you agree with me, our country is suffering, families are suffering. The difference, the gap between the wealthy and the poor, the have and the have-nots is stretched so far that I do not believe the two parties have a solution for that. We need to turn and look for a new solution and alternative third parties, and I'm running as a Green Party candidate. The major issues that we feel that are confronting us are jobs, housing, healthcare, education, and the environment. In terms of jobs, right now we need a Roosevelt New Deal kind of where jobs are created for people. We need to have a living wage. We need to fight for the workers. Healthcare, there's only single-payer universal healthcare. We have to take the profit motive out of healthcare. I'm a healthcare worker. It cannot be based on greed, because certain things, hospitals, public library, it cannot be, well, how much money, what's the bottom line? There cannot be a bottom line on that. Education, right now, over $1 trillion in student debt, that is really unacceptable. City College was free till 1976. Isn't that amazing? It was already done. What the Greens are asking for, it's retro, things that used to happen in New York. So, universal free education. In terms of the housing crisis, there's, who here would agree with me that Flushing needs more luxury condominiums? Okay, all right. So, a lot of times people say, where would all the solution come from? Right away, we stopped the war, we're bleeding in terms of money for Iraq, Afghanistan. The new F-35 fighter is estimated to cost $1 trillion. We bailed out the banks. The Bush administration, $700 billion. The Obama administration buying up toxic assets. It's uncountable. They already passed $1 trillion. So hopefully during the question, I'll be able to expound more on the ideas how a green economy can save the world. Thank you.
Please hold all applause until after the end of the event. Thank you. Next, we will move on to our next candidate, Mr. Dan Halloran. Mr. Halloran, 2 minutes, please.
Thank you. My name is Dan Halloran. I'm currently the City Councilman representing the 19th Councilmatic District. Those are the communities of Bayside, Whitestone, Flushing, College Point, Auburndale, and the northern skirts of Fresh Meadows. I'm very honored to be your council member. I am a Republican, conservative, and libertarian candidate. I don't have a primary in those parties. I will be through to the November ballot. My campaign platform is focused on 3 things: jobs, Israel and our national defense, and gas and energy prices. However, all 3 are actually inexorably intertwined. First and foremost, jobs. The president has had 3 years to try to get us back on track with jobs. It hasn't happened. Despite a slight downtick in the jobless first-time claims and benefits this past quarter, we know that overall the ratio has grown. In fact, there's about 20% of the population which are currently out of work because they are underemployed or they have fallen off the rolls of unemployment. That is not a good place to be. Tied into that, our president has killed the Keystone Pipeline deal to bring energy down from Canada to our refineries and shut our offshore drilling platforms completely. That put tens of thousands of workers out, including infrastructure workers who would have been our trade and union employees who could have built that pipeline. He's delayed it for political partisan reasons and only now is coming back to revisit the issue after enormous economic pressure and political pressure from even past President Bill Clinton, who criticized him for it. Our national defense has got to be our first and foremost important event in the country's bottom line of looking at what's happening. Israel, our strongest ally in the Middle East, is a country that deserves and should have our unfettered and unrequited support. That's not happened under this administration. Finally, there hasn't been any movement towards alternate energy sources. The one project this president is engaged in has wound up actually bankrupting that Cylinder project, the solar energy field. We've had no nuclear development. In fact, we've not looked for any way to become energy independent in the Middle East. Without providing those funds to make things happen, this country isn't going to go in the right direction. I'm honored to be here and honored to be running.
Thank you, Mr. Halloran. We'll now move on to the next candidate, Mr. Rory Lansman. Mr. Lansman, 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Thank you to the MinKwon Center for hosting this debate, and thank you to the other participating organizations. I'm Assemblyman Rory Lansman, and it's a tremendous honor to be here, as it is an honor to be a candidate for the United States Congress in the district that I was born and raised, where I live now with my wife and 3 children. I remember very fondly as a kid spending a lot of time here in downtown Flushing. I remember the RKO Keats. I remember the movie theater across the street, and I remember watching Flushing grow into the extraordinary, vibrant community that it is today, and it's something that makes all of us, it should make all of us proud as New Yorkers and residents of Queens. And I look forward to a vigorous conversation tonight about the issues that are important to working people. I grew up in Kew Gardens Hills with my mom in a rent-stabilized apartment. Were it not for the fact that rent stabilization existed, I would not have been able to afford to live in Queens. I went to Queens Public Schools, Queens College, Columbia Law School, served in the military, and have dedicated my life to leveling the playing field for ordinary people. As a civic leader, I fought overdevelopment. I fought the people who would pollute our neighborhoods. As a lawyer, I represented people who were discriminated against in the workplace, denied overtime wages, or sexually harassed. And as a member of the State Assembly, I've been an advocate for things that matter to people in my district, fighting for Homeland Security laws, fighting to level the playing field against Wall Street banks, fighting for civil rights and justice for all Americans, including our new immigrants. And these are the values and issues that I want to be able to take to Congress, to be able to fight and be an advocate for people like me, people who are growing up in this city, who are trying to make a middle-class life for themselves and are finding it extraordinarily difficult to do so, whether it's the burden of an affordable education, the fact that most Americans don't have any pension, and the economic anxiety that all of us feel in a time of great uncertainty. These are the issues that motivate me to be in public life, which motivate me to run for Congress, and I look forward to tonight's conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lansman. Now we'll move to the next candidate, Ms. Grace May. Ms. May.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you to each and every one of you for taking the time of your busy schedules and being here tonight. Thank you for all of our wonderful organizations for hosting tonight's event. I'm so proud to have this opportunity to run for Congress. As a daughter of immigrants who came in the 1970s, because of their hard work and their dedication and their commitment to teach their children to give back to the community, I had this opportunity to run for public office. I've been able to live my American dream, and whether it's going to different parts of the district and seeing people who have come from all different parts of the world, but they have the stories whose struggles are vastly similar. And I'm running for Congress because I want to make sure that each and every one of our children has that same exact opportunity. Whether it's improving education, whether it's protecting Social Security and Medicare, whether it's making sure that our corporations' tax loopholes are eliminated, and whether it's increasing the number of women, which is a woefully inadequate statistic of 17% in Congress today, I'm excited to be your Congress member. There's a tremendous trust deficit in Congress on behalf of the American people. As a proven bridge builder for the last 4 years as the state assemblywoman, I look forward to going to Congress and to continue to build bridges and to be able to accomplish more for our community. People are tired of hearing excuses, regardless of what side of the aisle you're on, about Congress not being able to get results. Our families, our working families, don't have the luxury to make excuses when they can't pay the bills, and neither should people in Congress. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Ms. Meng. And then finally, our last candidate tonight, Mr. Robert MinKwon. Mr. MinKwon.
Hi, and good evening, everyone. Annyeonghaseyo. Ni hao. My name is Dr. Robert MinKwon. Thank you to MinKwon for their gracious invitation to tonight's evening event. You are here tonight to hear from the candidates who are running for the Congress in the 6th Congressional District. We are all Democrats, and you, fellow Democrats, will decide in the Democratic primary on June 26 who will go on to the general election. As I said, my name is Dr. Robert MinKwon. I was born in Bayside, Queens, and I attended local schools from kindergarten through my college years at Queens College, where I served as student body president. I then went on to medical school and became a medical doctor. But I never left my Queens neighborhood. I stayed here in Queens, and on Bell Boulevard, I opened my practice, which has treated thousands of our neighbors in this community for over 20 years. Growing up, my father was a pharmacist in nearby Jackson Heights, and my mother served as a New York City public school teacher. We were a working class family, and my father always taught me, if you'll work hard and play by the rules, you can achieve great things in America. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, that is the promise of America. If you work hard and play by the rules, you can achieve great things in America. This is the American dream we all have come here to be a part of. But something went terribly wrong in America over the course of the past years, especially here in Queens, the place we all call home. Our current system has brought us record unemployment, 4 hospitals closed in Queens, 2 in this district, record home foreclosures, Social Security on the brink of collapse. And on our healthcare system, administrators and Washington insiders are now making medical decisions that once were made by patients and doctors. This is unacceptable. Healthcare in America has become nothing more than a ledger sheet. I am not a career politician.
Thank you, Mr. Bayside. Thank you. So now I would like to introduce our distinguished panelists for tonight. We have 4 panelists. First, we have Mr. David Chen. He is the City Hall Bureau Chief for the New York Times. And he has covered many recent political campaigns, such as the 2010 midterm elections, the recent governor's race in Connecticut, and the last New York City mayoral race. He is a well-traveled journalist with long experience in political matters. We also have Chung-Hwa Hong. She is the executive director of the New York Immigration Coalition, consisting of nearly 200 immigrant groups in New York. Chung-Hwa and the NYC have become the leading advocacy voice for the immigrant community in New York through issue campaigns, leadership development, and civic participation. We are also lucky to have Lucia Gomez Jimenez. She is the executive director of La Fuente, a nonprofit organization working with immigrants and workers through grassroots organizing, civic participation, and leadership development. Ms. Gomez-Jimenez has extensive experience in public service and on civic participation issues. And last but not least, we have Ms. Susan Lerner, the Executive Director of Common Cause New York, which is a nonpartisan advocacy group dedicated to encouraging citizen participation in democracy and ensuring an honest, open, and accountable government. Ms. Lerner and Common Cause have been one of the leading voices in fighting for campaign finance reform and ethics reform in New York State. And with that, now I'm going to turn it over to the panel, and I'm going to ask Mr. Chen, who I believe has a question on the economy and jobs. Mr. Chen.
Thanks everyone for coming out on this beautiful Monday evening. And I'm very honored to be a fellow panelist and here also, on this panel. Hopefully people will take a lot from this and make some informed decisions. The first question is something that everyone should take a crack at, and that's about the economy. So one of the biggest issues, not only for community members in Queens, but across the nation, has been about reviving the economy and creating jobs. What role does government have in job creation, and what would you do as representative to try to help create jobs for Queens constituents? And if you could be very specific about a program or about an idea or something like that, that would really help a lot. Thank you.
Okay. So since we started with Mr. Chow, we will actually start this round with Mr. Dan Halloran. So Mr. Halloran, you have 90 seconds for a response to this question. And we will go down the line and everybody will have 90 seconds. So Mr. Halloran, please.
Thank you. Well, first and foremost, I think it is the job of the government to be out of the way of business. Our small and mid-sized businesses in New York, 98% of them have disappeared in the period between 1840 and 2011. And that's just a fact. And it's unfortunate that the larger businesses, the ones that often get the breaks from government, are the ones who get sort of exempted from all of the things that the mom and pop shops have had to go through, whether it's payroll taxes, the commuter tax, the fact that they're now encouraging the small business tax to not be the level playing field it used to be. So the first thing government can do is get out of the way of small and mid-sized businesses, decrease the bureaucracy, decrease the number of agencies that they're accountable to, and ensure that they have a better level playing field when it comes to startups. The second thing that government can do is it can look at its tax rolls and say, are we overtaxing these businesses that are job creators, and give incentives to those businesses who are willing to take on new employees. And we need to do this before we lose what little is left of small businesses, which are the heart of Queens. Queens is one of those unique places in the world that has the mom and pop shops. The people live 10 blocks, 20 blocks from where there are small businesses located. These are the people who are employing across the boards. They're the ones we should be looking to save. In addition, we should look to manufacturing to see if we can lure them back. That's only going to happen if we make it economical for them to be here. When you overregulate industry, you drive away big business, and we've done that. Our district is suffering from that, and we need to keep places like our Elmhurst Dairy still intact. We can't afford to lose them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Halloran. Now, Mr. Lansman.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad that I have the opportunity to answer the question after Dan, because I think it perfectly frames the difference between the Republican and Democratic philosophy on the economy. We have an experiment of deregulation and getting government, quote unquote, out of the way of business. It's called the Wall Street meltdown. For 20 years, Congress and the courts deregulated Wall Street, eliminated Glass-Steagall, made it easier for Wall Street to become the casino that it became, and eventually, with the collapse of Lehman Brothers, Countrywide, etc., caused the Wall Street meltdown of 2008. I mean, just look what happened at J.P. Morgan last week. A $2 billion loss, about to grow into a $3 or $4 billion loss, because we have completely deregulated Wall Street and allowed it to wreak havoc on our economy rather than to be a factor of growing our economy. Government has a very, very important role in creating jobs and in growing our economy. We need to start by reforming Wall Street, making it an engine of economic growth, not a potential minefield that could blow up the economy once again. We need to provide support for small businesses so that they can get access to credit. I know many small businesses that are ready to grow, ready to expand, but the banks that are borrowing money at 0% interest from the federal government, from us taxpayers, are not lending it to small businesses. And lastly, I would say I certainly support the President's call for a national infrastructure bank, which would invest a small amount of taxpayer money, leverage private dollars, and get our aging infrastructure repaired and put tens of thousands of people back to work. Thank you very much.
And before we move on, I would like to introduce and recognize our sixth candidate for tonight, Ms. Elizabeth Crowley. Ms. Crowley, you'll actually be answering this question last, and you'll have 90 seconds to do so after Mr. Chow. Let's move on to Ms. Meng. Ms. Meng, you have 90 seconds.
I believe that it is government's responsibility to do its best to promote opportunity for our constituents. I believe that it's important now more than ever to encourage job training. Two specific things that I would work on is, number one, if elected to Congress, I would ask to be put on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. I believe that this is the way and very necessary for success in the borough of Queens. We need to make sure that we improve our mass transit system, our highways, roads, and bridges, and this is another way that we can increase jobs for local Queens residents. Another way that we can increase job growth here is to have better and closer partnerships between our universities and our hospitals. We need to do what we can to increase the opportunity for Queens to be more of a technology hub. We have a lot of old factories. We want to make sure that these old manufacturing centers can become the technological centers of the future. And this is the best way for us to provide jobs for our students, our veterans, and people who have been out of jobs for a long time.
Thank you, Ms. Meng. Mr. Mittman?
Hi, my name is Robert Mittman, and first thing I'll tell you is I strongly believe that we've got to balance the budget first. That's got to be main priority. We've got to make it easier on small business. We really shouldn't be interfering. We should, in fact, the government should stay out. Successful businesses will succeed as long as you don't overtax them. You make it more difficult to hire individuals. You put more obstacles, fines. You send, instead of allowing people to park in front of their stores and keep on giving them tickets, you should be making it easier for them to obtain business, especially in this bad economy. If any stimulus funds are going to be awarded to anybody, it should be for infrastructure. It shouldn't be for companies that close 6 months later for green energy because it sounded good. We, once again, got to encourage small businesses by trying to make it easier for them. Thank you.
Mr. Chow, 90 seconds.
Right now, by various statistics, we're looking at a country right now with 25 million unemployed. So, according to the different parties that have different strategies, I myself, the Greens, we're saying the only way out of this crisis is to spend more money. The only way out of this crisis is that the government fully engage in creating jobs. Right now, if we leave it up to corporations, you can see it's offshore, outsourced, and if it was up to them, my hospital would be closed and I would be downsized. And that would be a horrible way to live. So we must create these jobs. In my opening speech, I spoke about universal single payer, right? There's more hospitals, remain open, more jobs. We could build more hospitals instead of being downsized and let go. Build affordable housing, right there. You engage people to build jobs. Just as FDR, as a Republican, saw the problem of the recession. He knew that we have to spend. Back then, the Republicans were against it. They said, we got to leave it up to business. How did this crash come in 1929? How did the crash come in 2008 with the housing crisis? So we must rely on the government. Our goal is to engage in these government programs. That's where the job will come from. Then in addition, we need to have a living wage, workers' rights protected, unemployment insurance, and a guaranteed income for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Cho. Ms. Crowley, you have 90 seconds to answer this question.
Annyeonghaseyo. Good evening. I'm sorry I'm late. My name is Elizabeth Crowley. I'm a New York City Council member. I'm going to answer the question about jobs, but just so everyone knows a little bit about me. Born and raised in Queens. Been elected since 2008 and have focused on public safety, improving the quality of education, and always protecting our seniors. I believe government has a very important role in job creation. Now, my background's a little different than many of my opponents. Right out of college, I worked on many construction renovation sites. I was a decorative painter, restoring old buildings, and you could appreciate that in historic parts of Flushing, where we are today. Now, learning about construction, I knew how much of an economic driver it really is. Not only then when I worked in the industry, but also today. It's one of the largest economic engines. And right now, Our federal government is spending millions of dollars every month over in Afghanistan. Our president has promised to bring back our troops as quickly as possible. We spent nearly $500 million in Afghanistan. We were using that money here, or using the money that we're currently spending to invest in our country, in good jobs, in infrastructure projects, construction jobs, and the ripple effect that those jobs have on our economy. A lot more people would be working today and paying into Social Security. I also support other industries, not only construction, but in Flushing and Long Island City. There
Thank you,
are
Ms. Crowley. We have to
growing
move on.
industries, and we'll talk
Ms. Crowley?
more about that. Okay.
Now we'll move on to Ms. Susan Lerner. Ms. Lerner has a question about budgeting and tax policy. Ms. Lerner.
Over the past year, the question of the federal deficit has been highly controversial. There are those who believe that it's an emergency that has to be dealt with instantly. There are those who believe that it is a longer-term economic issue. There are those who believe that you have to drastically cut spending, and others who believe that when the economy recovers or taxes are increased, that will take care of the deficit. Last week, House Speaker Boehner said that the debt ceiling should not be raised unless the raise is offset by an equal or greater amount of spending cuts. President Obama, on the other hand, has stated that he believes the debt ceiling should be raised, as it has been uncontroversially in the past, without having to resort to another round of spending cuts. If you were elected as representative successfully in November, how would you vote on a debt ceiling raise and why?
Okay. For this question, we're going to start with Mr. Landsman. Mr. Landsman, you have 90 seconds.
Well, thank you. It's one of the most important questions that the country faces, and again, it exposes the different ideologies and philosophies between the Democratic and Republican parties. Last summer, the Republican Party in Congress was more than willing to let the United States government default on its debt, to lower the credit rating of the United States government to score political points. The answer to our deficit problem can be summed up in one word: growth. We see what austerity and budget cuts, cutting is doing in Europe, in Greece, in the UK, in Spain, in Italy. It's not solving their budget deficit, it's making it worse. Those economies are contracting. Thank goodness that President Obama pushed through the stimulus program at the beginning of his term. He really rescued this economy from the very, very brink of disaster. As we go forward, we have to focus on growing our economy. We have to make responsible and reasonable cuts, not the reckless cuts that the Republicans have made to Social Security and to Medicare. And we have to have a serious conversation in this country about tax fairness. I was one of the leaders in the fight in New York to make sure that New York's millionaires pay their fair share of taxes to help us get out of our budget deficit here in New York. That's a conversation that they're having in Washington right now. And I expect to be able to go to Washington and to make the same case that people like Mitt Romney and Warren Buffett should not be paying a lower tax rate than most of the people in this room. Responsible cuts, growing our economy, and a tax system that's fair for all. That's the prescription for dealing with our deficit in the long term.
Thank you, Mr. Landsman. We'll move on to Ms. Meng. Once again, a reminder that the question is, how would you vote on the debt ceiling and why? Ms. Meng, you have 90 seconds.
I would have supported voting on the debt ceiling. The debt ceiling for America is essentially our credit card. It's important, first and foremost, that America pays its obligation. However, we must make sure that we do not cut essential human services that are so important to the working families of America. There are ways that we must try to increase revenue. And I agree with my colleague about Assemblyman Landsman about reform of the tax structure. Right now we have corporations that are basically headquartered in America, but they make their profits overseas and aren't taxed on those profits at all. We also have, if I were in Congress, I would also try to promote tax incentives for our domestic corporations that try their best to increase and maintain jobs in the United States.
Thank you, Ms. Meng. Mr. Mittman.
Hi, my name is Robert Mittman, and to make it blunt, I don't really feel, even though I'm a Democrat, that we should be raising the debt ceiling. You know, when we raise a family and we have children, one of the first things we teach them is that if you have $1, you can only spend $1. You can't spend $1.25 because it just keeps on adding up. And the bottom line is, what we've got to do, we've got to realize that we've got to cut things. But I'm not saying in the United States there's other things that we can cut. We should cut foreign aid. We should cut a lot of the military expenditures. We'll keep strong, but we got to cut military expenditures. We're in too many countries, over 100 countries, with hundreds and hundreds of bases. And we can't afford the new medical system that is being proposed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mittman. Mr. Joe?
If elected to Congress as a Green Party member, I would also vote yes to extend the debt ceiling. But I would just, ask the people of America and look at why is it that to bail out Wall Street and we come up with a new term, they're too big to fail. There is not a discussion of deficit and the problem. Why is it to fight a war in Iraq, Afghanistan, possibly beating drums for Iran? There's no discussion. Well, how much is that draining our resources, spoiling and ruining the lives of our young children and veterans coming home? So we want to balance this budget. Yes, after we vote to raise the debt ceiling, we have to look at how can we balance it. Many of the candidates mentioned you have to tax Wall Street, progressive taxation, stock transfer tax to generate more income. They make more, you spend more. And then also we want to extend, now that they've given us the new concept of too big to fail, we have to use that concept on the schools are too big to fail, the hospitals are too big to fail, this library is too big to fail, and the post office is too big to fail. So with that, temporary, as a homeowner, you're underwater, you're behind the payment, so what? Just kick you out, foreclose on you, and that's exactly what's happening. But if we want to move to a new consciousness, a new society, we bail out the homeowner. We have the banks take over the federal banking, local banking, and then we restructure the loan for that homeowner so he or she can stay in the home. That's how you save a budget crisis, not by just foreclosing and bail out the bank.
Thank you. Ms. Crowley, you have 90 seconds.
I believe that we've just come out of the worst recession in our country's history since the Great Depression. And while we needed to raise our debt ceiling to maintain good government policy and economic growth, we have to realize that if we didn't do that, we wouldn't have had the growth that we've had since pulling ourselves out of the bad recession that we've had. And I believe that if need be, we need to continue to raise the debt ceiling to make sure that our government is doing what it needs to do to incubate job growth and economic development. There are many ways that we can cut wasteful spending, and we should encourage spending when it's smart spending and cutting where it's necessary to reduce our deficit. But at the end of the day, our government needs to make sure that it's investing resources in its greatest capital, and that means the people. And the people need access to higher education. And one of the main focuses that I plan to, given the opportunity to represent in Congress, is to make sure that we keep the rate on student loans, the interest rate, low, so people can have the opportunity to go to school and to gain meaningful employment. And more and more people working are more and more people paying taxes, and that's more government dollars for spending and for cutting the deficit.
Thank you, Ms. Crowley. Mr. Halloran, go ahead.
Thank you. First, let me say that I can't tell you what I do because I need to know what the bill that was in front of me was going to do. Was it going to be tied to other cuts? What was the timetable for those cuts? Are we going to have something as ridiculous as the super committee tied to it? Let me just say this. First of all, it's $17 trillion today. When do we say it's enough? When do your credit cards max out? Do you get to call the company up and say, hey, listen, I need another $50,000 credit line? No, you don't get to do that. Why can your government? Take a look at your paycheck. Let's be realistic. Look down at your paycheck after FICA, Social Security, state, federal, and local income tax comes out of it. You're getting 43% taken off the top. So you want to talk about putting money back in people's pockets? How about stop taking it from them in the first place? Okay? Let's also look at Wall Street. Everyone wants to beat up Wall Street. Wall Street provides 1/3 of the city of New York's revenue. 1/3. If we're going to talk about meaningful reform and get these businesses to come back from overseas, we have to talk about making the job climate better for them here. Now, I have no problem with heavily taxing corporations and eliminating loopholes. But if we're going to do that, then everybody has to pitch in and say we're going to be on the same page with this. Higher education? No, we don't need higher education for everybody. College educations are not what they need. They need trade and vocational training. That's what our people need in order to go into the next generation. They don't need to be told by the media and by Hollywood they should be doctors and lawyers. They need to become plumbers, technicians, and looking toward the 21st century computer technicians. That's where we save money. And by the way, foreign aid is 1% of the federal budget. Cutting it out is not going to accomplish anything. Thank you.
So we're going to move on to the next question. We're going to stick on a similar theme, though. Ms. Gomez Jimenez has a question on military spending.
President Obama has claimed that the war in Iraq is over and that U.S. troops should be out of Afghanistan by 2014. Given the current emphasis on the federal deficit, the issue of military spending is becoming more important. If we include current and past military activities, 47% of the entire 2013 federal budget, that's almost $1.4 trillion, is currently allocated to military spending. At the same time, funding for critical services and community development has been cut significantly. Do you think that current levels of military spending are justified? And ideally, what percentage of the federal budget do you believe military spending should make up?
For this round of questions, we're going to start with Ms. May. Ms. May.
First off, I do want to say that we appreciate and respect so much our men and women in armed services, because if it weren't for them, we wouldn't have the daily quality of life that we enjoy here in America. That being said, I do believe that when President Bush was our current president, he overextended himself in international affairs. I agree with President Obama's current plans, how he is slowly withdrawing troops from Afghanistan and withdrawal of troops from Iraq. I believe that while it's important to reach out and to help our neighbors, first and foremost, it's important to help those who are most in need, who are in America, and it's essential that we don't cut basic human services.
Thank you, Ms. May. Before we move on, I just want to do a quick reminder that we will be taking questions from the audience at the end after the panelists finish their questions. So if you have a question, please write it down and give it to one of the ushers. 10 more minutes to submit a question. Thank you. Let's move on to Mr. Mittman.
Yes. First and foremost, it's most important that we remain strong and be a leader. But we can't be the policemen of the world any longer. We don't have the money to do so. We've got to consolidate. We've got to look at all the foreign bases. We've got to actually continue to cut down on these war expenditures. But we still have to remain strong. We have to bring the military personnel home, and we've got to find them jobs also when they do arrive here. So my answer is I'd cut it substantially, but it would depend on how and when, but we need to cut it substantially.
Thank you, Mr. Mittman. Mr. Cho?
Green Party is a party of peace. To get peace, you cannot make war. Once you make war, you cannot have peace. In order to maintain peace, there has to be justice. I want peace for Israel, but I want peace for Palestine, I want peace for Iraq, I want peace for Afghanistan, I want peace for Iran, I want peace for China. To have a peaceful world, you must have peace. If you arm yourself, just like I go to the school, if I start carrying knives, guns, and I resolve all my resolutions by a violent means, there cannot be peace. The military budget, not only is it bloated, it's too big, and look at where it's all tied to. It's tied to, once again, I know we're beating up Wall Street, so let me use corporations, where it's all tied to corporations. Lockheed Martin got the contract to build 35 new fighter jets. Well, it began with $486 million. Now it's projected at $1 trillion each for this fighter jets. And then, as you know, we give out Pentagon a blank check. They can spend as much as they want, the war as much as they want. And that, if we're talking about the whole picture, the health of the environment, social economic justice, all the things that I want to see happen in a new Green Deal, affordable housing, hospital, the schools being built. Well, we have to make a choice, right? If you fight these wars, fully fund the military. We're laughing at North Korea. They spent so much money on their military. Look at them, they're poor. We laughed at the Soviet Union. They spent so much on the military. Look what happened to them. Ha, ha, ha. So why don't we open their eyes and look at what our government is doing?
Thank you, Mr. Cho. Ms. Crowley?
I think that it's hard to say exactly what percentage is the right percentage to spend, but we've been spending far too much money every year on the military. I support the men and women of our armed forces that risk their lives every day for our freedoms, the freedoms that so many of us take for granted, the freedoms that many countries aren't afforded. However, we have to understand there comes a time when it's not military spending, it's foreign aid. What we're doing in Afghanistan is we're building schools and we're building firehouses when the threat of closing schools and closing down firehouses is happening right here in New York City. It doesn't make sense to weaken the structure of our country just to build up the structure of another country that is completely unstable and doesn't believe in the democratic democracy that we believe in and that we fought hard to protect as Americans. And we can't change the way every country thinks, but we need to make sure that we're always protected. And one way to keep our country, the strong country that it is investing in our resources here, bringing our military men and women back home, giving them good jobs, helping them support their families, and making sure that our local police department and our fire department have the resources that they need just to protect us. You know, we have to understand that we're still, as a city, the number one target for terrorists, more so than any other place.
Thank you, Ms. Crowley. We have to move on to Mr. Halloran.
Thank you. First, I guess that if you're going to get a number, you've got to peg it somewhere between 20 and 25%, because that would realistically give the Pentagon the ability to do what it needs to do without immediately jeopardizing our long-term political interests. The military employs over 500,000 persons in this region alone. There's almost 1.5 million contractors, subcontractors, and researchers working for the Department of Defense. All of those are jobs right here in the United States. So let's not just wave a magic wand and make the military disappear, because along with it will disappear a lot of other things, including our national security. And that's tied to our domestic agenda as well. Keeping America safe is not an easy job, and the deployment of our troops around the country enables the United States to react quickly to crises, whether we are talking about the Cuban Missile Crisis in the 60s, or we're talking about the North Korean threat of incursion that occurred just a year and a half ago, when they decided that bombing islands in the south of Korea was okay, because other nations looked the other way. We cannot completely say that the military budget is the root of all problems. Yes, there's overspending. Much of that has come under congressional supervision. Our veterans returning need better job placement and training. They need commitments from the city of New York to do better for them. The New York City Department of Veterans Services in New York has a $500,000 budget. $480,000 goes to 4 people to get paid. That's not serving your veterans when they come home. Those are the things we need to be talking about. Justice requires the ability to enforce it.
Thank you, Mr. Heller. Mr. Lansman?
Thank you very much. First, let me thank the Hollywood media and media elites for encouraging me to go to college and to get a law degree and become a professional. It's enabled me to make something of my life, and I'm very grateful for that. Having served in the Army as an infantry platoon leader in the 42nd Infantry Division here in New York, I have an enormous appreciation and respect for what our men and women in uniform do for us every day. And all of us remember the tragic events of September 11th. That's why I focused a big part of my legislative agenda in Albany on homeland security issues, having passed 5 substantive laws to protect us from the threat of terrorism. It's true that our military obligations are winding down in Iraq and Afghanistan, and that will create an enormous savings for us in our military budget. And it's true that we need to focus on building schools and hospitals here in New York and in the United States, less so in Baghdad or Kabul. But it's also true that New York remains a significant threat of terrorist attack, which we must take very, very seriously. Our first obligation as a government is to protect our citizens from all enemies, foreign and domestic. That is the oath that one of us will be taking in November. Or in January rather. And so we certainly need to reduce our military budget. We will accomplish that with winding down the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, but we cannot go back to the days where we leave ourselves unprotected from continuing terrorist threat.
Thank you. So we will now move on to the next question from the panelists. Ms. Chung-Hwa Hong has a question about immigration policy. I wanted to remind all the candidates, please, to answer the question The specific question is posted actually on the screen behind the candidates, and we are really looking for specifics. So Ms. Hong.
All right. Thank you so much for participating. I think this is really a robust set of candidates. So thank you. Regarding immigration reform, everyone agrees that our current immigration system is broken. And in Queens, because we have so many immigrants, we suffer disproportionately from our dysfunctional system. And the fact that we have 12 million undocumented immigrants living in the shadows is just one indication of the problem. What kind of immigration reform do you support? Please describe specific components that you think must be included in immigration reform. And second, what specific strategies and activities do you promise to engage in to try to promote that immigration reform that did not happen in the last session?
Thank you, Ms. Hong. We're going to start this round with Mr. MinKwon.
Thank you, Mrs. Hong. I think it was a great question. You know, the first and foremost thing, one of the important issues that you brought up was non-residents who are in our area. In fact, we're fighting over one seat that used to be 2 seats. And one of those reasons is because those individuals are not being counted. Additionally, we have to bring these individuals, these people who are part of our community, and bring them into our system. A lot of them who are paying taxes, who are working hard, who are raising a family, who are in our school system, we should have some formula, a comprehensive plan to give them a road to permanent citizenship. We also need to establish a system where we're going to control our borders and stop a tremendous influx of new individuals trying to become citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Minman. Mr. Joe?
On the immigration policy, I personally believe that they should be given general amnesty, that there should be a pathway to citizenship. That this is how in this country we have, you have a documented, you have a green card, we pathway to citizenship, we come up with, maybe it could be a photo driver's license, something that proves that here's their address, this is where the kids go to school, this is the health care that they need, so that we have a pathway to citizenship. They're here already. Many times, unless you just want to, build a wall everywhere, do not allow them to use this library, do not allow them to get on the MTA bus, they're here already. Their children are American citizens. However you think about that law, that's the law of the country right now. So when the immigration raid comes, they take the parents away in detention and another for-profit organization. So how is that right? So of course, we want to look at immigration. We always want to look at, well, why is everybody coming? Well, with NAFTA, NAT, free trade agreement, unequal trade balances, you have countries messing where they cannot get a living wage. Imagine if they had a living wage. If I was a Mexican person, I had a living wage, a union job, I would simply come to New York on a vacation. At the end of my vacation, I would want to go home to my job. It would not be this fight to come to New York, to fight, to wait, to work here, and also look at the oppression that the immigrants go through. That they're being treated what? Long working hours, lowest paid, and it kind of feeds off that negative cycle. So the Green Party, myself, we want to see a positive immigration cycle. Create jobs, have good jobs in Mexico, good jobs in New York.
Thank you, Mr. Joe. Ms. Crowley?
Thank you. I am the granddaughter of immigrants, and I believe New York City is the city that it is because it's always been a place for people all over the world to come and start a new life, come to achieve the American dream. It was the case for my grandparents, and each generation has been able to do better than the next, and that's part of the reason I'm running for Congress. I support comprehensive immigration reform. I know that when many of the immigrants come to the country, they're very hard-working. Many do pay taxes, even if they're here without proper documentation. Half of the children born to the city, I believe it's increasing every year. More than half of the kids born are born to immigrant parents, some who don't have documents. I worry mostly about those kids and the quality of education that they receive and always living in somewhat of a shadow. I want to make sure that we support programs and acts like the DREAM Act to afford kids an opportunity to go to college and not have to worry about how they're going to pay for it, or for families to not be split up because a father or a parent may have come to the country without the proper documentation. I think it's important to make sure that the comprehensive immigration reform respects families and keeps families together.
Thank you, Ms. Crowley. Mr. Halloran?
First, it was my great-great-grandparents who came here to Flushing and started building for their community in the 1840s during the famines, which were actually not really famines because the English just hoarded the food at the time, but that's a whole other story. New York City is a melting pot. It's a melting pot for a reason. We've all been able to come here to integrate, to share. Comprehensive immigration reform has been stymied by two things, really. And they're the problem with Washington in general, the polarization of the issue. First of all, you cannot reward someone who came here illegally with citizenship, but you can give them a path to permanent residency. We need to know who is here in this country. We need to do the background checks that we would do with any lawful immigrant. We need to provide them an opportunity to fill out that paperwork, to set themselves into the system, to pay the fines and the fees that every other immigrant pays when they come to this country. We need to verify that over the next 10 years after they're granted that permanent status, that they're paying their taxes, they're filing every year, so that they're contributing to this community. We need to make sure that they're not engaging in any criminal activity, and that we can have a zero-tolerance policy going forward. There's nothing wrong with protecting your borders. There's nothing wrong with requiring people who emigrate here to fill out forms, and if they need assistance to do that, we fund plenty of initiatives in the city of New York to help you do it. The question becomes, do we make this a fair process for all the people who've come here lawfully? And to do that, we have to make sure that everyone is treated the same.
Thank you, Mr. Halloran. Mr. Landsman?
Well, thank you. And to paraphrase, I believe Eleanor Roosevelt, let me say to my fellow immigrants and the children of immigrants, immigration is what built this country, it's what built this city. When you look around you, Flushing, what it has become, a dynamic center of commerce and culture and educational opportunities because of the immigrants who came here and rolled up their sleeves and went to work. I've been an advocate for immigrants as long as I've been in public and political life. I used to chair the Queens Hospital Center Community Advisory Board, where our mission as a public hospital was to care for everyone who showed up at our door looking for health care, regardless of their ability to pay and regardless of their immigration status. Let me just focus on two bills that I support in the Assembly and that I would support as a federal version. They're the DREAM Act and the DREAM Fund. And they focus in particular on the children of immigrants who came to this country and now don't have the opportunity to pursue a higher education. And I remember recently being at the MinKwon Center at a campaign kickoff to get the DREAM Act and DREAM Fund passed in New York. I remember being with a young woman who could not pursue her education beyond college to become a doctor, to become a healthcare professional, because she didn't have access to the funding. And what I said then, I'll say now, and this is what I plan to say if I'm elected to Congress. What a loss for the United States of America that we have bright, industrious, hardworking, responsible young individuals here in the United States who want to make careers here, who want to contribute, and we're turning them away because we're not recognizing that they have something to contribute and are not providing them with a path to citizenship. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Meng?
First, I do want to thank the New York Immigration Coalition and MinKwon Center, who consistently bring to the attention of legislators across the city, state, and nation of very people that we are often fighting for. I too am an advocate and supporter of the DREAM Act, and my argument is an economic one. We have many students in this country, students who are unable to go to the colleges that they want, unable to go get the jobs that they want. And we want them to go to the schools that they want, to get good jobs, to pay taxes, and to increase our revenue in New York State and the United States. That's one area that I would be supportive of. A second area I believe that is tremendously important is the incredible backlog of the system and the process of the USCIS Immigration Agency. We have countless stories from people in our office as a representative of Flushing, where families, parents who have petitioned for their children and are unable to see their children for 10 years, 15 years. It's obvious that this affects community life and local life here in the community when a child comes and hasn't been with his parents in 10 years. We have students who have come legally on student visas and have waited many, many years to get their green card and to get their citizenship. So backlog is something that would be one of my top focus priorities.
Thank you, Ms. Meng. Now we're going to move on to the next question. We're going to go back to Ms. Lerner. Ms. Lerner has a question about money and politics. Ms. Lerner.
Many people in New York, regardless of political ideology, are very concerned about the vast sums of money which are spent from different constituencies, corporations, unions, wealthy individuals, to influence policy at both the national and the state and city level. So, based on that broad concern, I have two questions for you. Are there any sources of campaign contributions that, while legal, you have decided not to accept money from? And secondly, if you were elected, do you support the Fair Elections Now Act, a public funding bill that is pending in Congress? If not, why not? And if yes, would you sign up as a co-sponsor?
We're going to start this round of questions with Mr. Cho.
Yes, I would support the Fair Election Now Act. I believe that part of the reason why there are so many millionaires in Congress, they get the Cadillac plan of healthcare pension plans, is because of the money, because of the uneven distribution of wealth. For a local candidate, for a worker candidate run, it's almost impossible. I would not be able to afford the campaign ad, and oftentimes many of the press act like gatekeepers. They do not report me. So imagine if we had a public financing where, MinKwon, the radio, TV stations must broadcast this so that all of the citizens of the district can see. Imagine that for democracy. I would not have to be concerned about how many ads can I buy, how can I get on MinKwon, how can I get on TV.
Anybody you wouldn't accept money from?
Well, the Green Party, they have a platform where we don't accept money from any corporation. I will accept money from individuals. And as many of you know, the Citizens United passed making corporations to a human being, and then allow that these PACs can give unlimited amount of money to candidates. In a sense, this is almost like a corporate candidate. The lobbyists already are flooding D.C. We already cannot get them out of the way. We're just passing laws to give them more power, more money. And it should not be about money. It hopefully should be about ideas, people, and the new Green Deal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cho. Ms. Crowley?
I support the Fair Elections Act, and given the opportunity, I would also sign on as a co-sponsor. As many people know in this room, I'm a New York City Council member, and we have a fair policy of the Campaign Finance Board, which oversees campaigns that participate and helps candidates who are going up against a candidate that doesn't participate. I believe their rules and regulations are very fair, and it gives an opportunity for somebody who isn't independently wealthy or just an independent person, not part of an establishment, an opportunity to run for office. The campaign funds that I have raised have mostly been from local donors, people who live in the city, who work in the city, and I've also accepted contributions from union PACs. I believe that that's different than big corporations. Unions are comprised of working men and women, and they're so often under attack by some of these PACs in Washington, in particular by big business corporation that doesn't believe in the working person. So often we need to make sure that other cities are doing as well as New York City is with job creation, smart jobs, good jobs, and I support union jobs, and I am also very proud to have received the endorsement of so many unions, including the PBA, the UFA, the local electricians union, all of the building trades, the transportation workers.
Thank you, Ms. Crowley. Thank you. Let's move on, Mr. Halloran.
I would agree not to take money from big corporations in my campaign. However, when we talk about the Fair Elections Now Act, it's not comprehensive enough. If we're going to have real electoral reform, it has to involve not only on the campaign finance side, but natural districts. We cannot have politicians gerrymandering their districts in order to suit their political needs rather than natural geography that exists. The city of New York is a great example of political gerrymandering. Both our Assembly and Senate have done that, and it's not right. This district, in fact, cuts out Whitestone, Douglaston, and Little Neck, and College Point, which you have to go through to get to the rest of this district. And it was put in Steve Israel's district on Long Island. So if we're going to talk about it, let's be fair and talk about what the real issues are. We have created political interest groups. Those political interest groups are being pandered to by the creation of these districts in the first place. The second thing is, I disagree with my colleague Liz. In my city council race, my opponent outspent me 7-1 in his campaign. I received campaign finance money. 90% of his money was raised outside of my council district in his race. So if we're going to talk about this, we need to talk about it across the board. We need to talk about unions not being able to give both money and soldiers to a campaign and not having credit for it. But if we want to eliminate the corporate influence, which I understand, then it has to be fair. And unions aren't any more people's too than corporations are. You can buy a share in a corporation, you can join a union. There's no difference whatsoever, except that corporatism is a problem, not corporations.
Thank you,
Small
Mr.
corporations
Howard.
are not the
Thank
issue.
you. Mr. Landsman, and please remember this is a two-part question. Do you support the Fair Elections Now Act, and is there anyone you would not accept campaign contributions from?
Well, let me answer the second question first because it's the easy one. You know, last week I was standing outside J.P. Morgan Chase with former Mayor Ed Koch, laying out a Wall Street reform agenda to make sure that the financial meltdown that happened in 2008 isn't repeated. So Wall Street has made it easy for me that I don't accept checks from Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan, Jamie Dimon, or any of those big firms because I'm on the other side of the issues from them. And, you know, that is an impediment to raising money in New York because those are the folks who've got the big bucks. But I appreciate the question very much. You know, Common Cause and I have worked together on many, many reform issues in Albany, whether it's campaign finance reform, redistricting, ethics reform, you name it. I do support fair elections, clean money, clean elections, campaign finance reform generally, and whatever the term is. We need to get the corrosive effect of politics, of money, outside of the political process. It was earlier referenced to the Supreme Court's decision in Citizen United, which equated corporations with people for political giving. I wrote legislation in New York which is pending, which would undo or limit the damage done by Citizens United, because that's my job as a responsible legislator, to come up with solutions to the problems that we had. And I can guarantee you, if I get the chance to represent you in Washington, you're going to see me as a leader on government reform, including campaign finance reform, because you, the voters, are the ones who should be controlling and deciding our political process, not the big corporations.
Thank you, Mr. Landsman. Ms. Meng, remember the two parts of the question. Please provide an answer response to that. Thank you.
Yes, I do support the Fair Elections Now Act, and I would co-sponsor it. Just as a reminder, none of us candidates in this congressional campaign are allowed to take any checks from corporations, big or small. We have in this election the highest level of scrutiny for my individual campaign. We've hired people, one, to vet all our checks, and number two, to be a strict compliance officer. And any time that we knowingly find that someone has violated any sort of legal or even ethical rule, we choose to either not accept the check, or if we find out after the fact, we've returned checks as well. And that's a policy that will be continuing throughout the campaign.
Thank you, Ms. Meng. Mr. Mittman.
Our forefathers designed the House of Representatives as a citizen Congress. Unfortunately, you have career politicians who spend decades in Congress. They set up relationships with big business, with unions, with political bosses. Because I'm not a politician, I am a citizen, a local doctor, the person who our forefathers had envisioned our House of Representatives to be. I was not included in the targets of the lobbyists, fat cat, political bosses, and special interests. So, second question is very easy. The first question is, I absolutely would agree that the Fair Elections Act should be something that would be implemented, and limits should be made in terms of spending. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mittman. Now we're going to go back to the panel. We have a question from Ms. Hong about immigration policy. Ms. Hong.
Back to immigration has many complex parts. Have you heard of a program, federal enforcement program called Secure Communities? It's a program that enlists local law enforcement to match the fingerprints of people who are arrested and then send over to the federal immigration database, and as a result end up funneling tens of thousands of people for deportations. So our Governor Cuomo has come out against it. Mayor Bloomberg and City Council have enacted legislation to limit local law enforcement involvement in immigration reform. So do you support or oppose Secure Communities and the broader issue of local cops getting involved in immigration enforcement? And how do you assess, is there anything that President Obama has implemented, including programs like secure communities, that you think should have been done differently in the area of immigration enforcement and deportations?
Thank you, Ms. Hall. We will start this round with Ms. Crowley. Ms. Crowley.
Thank you. I, like the governor and like the mayor, am against the secure communities policy. I think it's a play on words. I firmly believe it's the federal government's role to enforce immigration, and that we shouldn't be using city resources to do so. However, we have to understand that there should be a fine line. If somebody is a serious threat to our country's security, then right away, if that person is found in a community, that information should be given to the federal government. However, many city resources were used to detain people who didn't commit any crimes, and that they may have had like a violation, driving without a license, or may have overstayed their visa. And those aren't crimes. I don't believe that they're crimes, and I don't think that people should be arrested for overstaying their visa, or I don't believe that Rikers Island should act as the immigration services. And I supported that local law that was passed in the city council that prevented the Department of Corrections from enforcing immigration detainers on those that were not convicted of any crime and were not doing anything that was considered a serious crime. So I think that we have to make sure that the policy that the governor supports, I support.
We'll move on now to Mr. Halloran.
First, let me say that there needs to be a clear delineation of the separation of powers. Liz is completely correct when she says that it's the federal government's job to enforce immigration law, which is why many people in the council felt it was necessary to pull us out of the cooperation with ICE in our legal system. However, it's not true that being here illegally is not a crime. It is a crime. And this has to go back to our comprehensive immigration reform. We have to provide these people with an opportunity to register themselves, to not be on a track to citizenship, but a track to residency, conditioned on completing the immigration database that's required, paying the fees like everyone else who comes here to this country, following up by proving that they are paying their taxes and not committing crimes. We cannot sacrifice our national security when the police come into contact with somebody. It's not because they were on the street and they randomly got stopped and asked what their identity was and what their national origin was. People who are put through the system, well, stop and frisk being put aside for the moment as a policy. Well, what I'm saying is that if they're in the CJA system, there's a reason they were fingerprinted. Now, many times, as Liz indicated quite correctly, that is because of some infraction or violation which is not criminal. And that's certainly not who we want to scare by putting them through this system, and let alone pay for it and detain for years on end before they get into bullpens where immigration deportation takes place. But we've got to fix the big problem. Immigration reform has to take place so there's a goal, so they can get somewhere. So this isn't the issue.
Thank you, Mr. Halloran. Mr. Lantzman?
Well, let's start from the simple proposition that people who commit serious crimes should not be welcome in this country. I think that we can all agree on that. What secure communities became, though, was a mechanism for detaining and deporting people who either committed minor violations and were otherwise law-abiding individuals who were working and providing for their families, or people who, in fact, committed no violations whatsoever but just got swept up in the process. I have a problem with that in and of itself in absolute terms, but it also created an atmosphere of fear and distrust in immigrant communities that created very serious obstacles between cooperation with law enforcement, the ability and willingness for undocumented immigrants to receive essential services, and that is not a helpful policy or system of immigration enforcement for anybody. So I think the answer is comprehensive immigration reform. It is a system that is focused on preventing individuals who are committed serious crimes from staying in this country, but not allowing it to become a vehicle for disrupting families and for conducting what amounts to large-scale sweeps of individuals who, although undocumented, are otherwise, and I know that my Republican friends might disagree with me here, are otherwise contributing enormously to this country. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lansman. Mrs. May?
I personally oppose secure communities. I was part of the conversations with various state legislators and the Governor Cuomo's administration, and proudly applaud his decision to withdraw from New York State from that program. I believe that the best way to ensure a secure community is to make sure that we have good relationships between local law enforcement and our those very same communities. It's important that, like many of my colleagues up here said today, that we don't utilize local law enforcement and have them pose as immigration officials. Having represented an area like Flushing and the 109 precinct, we know that we don't have enough police officers on the street as it is. We don't need them acting and carrying out the duties of federal immigration authorities.
Thank you, Ms. May. Mr. Mittman?
I additionally agree with the governor and mayor's stand on secure communities. Once again, somebody who is undocumented immigrant, who's raised his family, who's worked, who's contributed to the community, should not be pulled over and hauled into immigration court and deported, left in jail. We have to distinguish between a violent crime and a traffic violation. In addition, as stated earlier, I think it's a federal issue. It's not a city or state issue, and we have to distinguish that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mittman. Mr. Cho?
I do not support the secure community. The local law enforcement, even if we were to poll them, would they want to take on additional tasks? Already, as you know, they're under 5 for stop and frisk. How would you know what an immigrant looked like? If you walk through Flushing right now, would you know who is documented and undocumented? If you want to have safe communities, secure communities, you got to listen to the Green Party. We need social, economic justice. When you have that, there is less tendency to commit crime. And the police, they should be looking out. When people commit crimes, you stop them. It's that simple. On President Obama, as you know, many of his policies, I only want to criticize him. Right now, it's just deportation, separating a family. And as I stated earlier, the prison system is outsourced, contracted out to a private corporation. Can you imagine that the profit now, these immigrants have become a cash cow for us? So I'm asking him to stop the deportation, stop the separating family, stop making illegal immigrants as a cash cow. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cho. We're going to go back to the panel from Mr. Chen with a question on higher education and student debt. Just a reminder to the candidates to please answer the specific questions that are being asked by the panel. Thank you.
The cost of tuition and fees for college has skyrocketed since the 1980s, increasing at a rate far greater than inflation and wages. We've seen a long story in the Times recently about sort of how a lot of college students are incredibly saddled by debt. So while many students are now protesting sort of the burdens of record debt, some view this as simply a commitment one must make to their future. What would you do about this issue? And should we expect public funding or more public funding for higher education?
We're going to start with Mr. Haller.
Oh, thank you. First, I paid for college myself. I was fortunate to have an ROTC scholarship, so I can get the military thing in there now. And was very fortunate to go to a good law school on scholarship, but I still carry well over $50,000 worth of law school debt with me 10 years out. So I understand the problem. The question becomes the ratio of what other burdens we're imposing on our incoming workforce, running from taxes on up in their paycheck as to what has to come out. So I think we really need to talk about a step-up program in our tax structure that acknowledges the debt-to-income ratio of our students who are entering the workforce. We also, as I said earlier, need to encourage higher education to go in the direction of training vocational skill education, which can be augmented both by public funding as well as availability of Stafford and Pell and other grant programs that we've cut back on. It is not appropriate for the government to eliminate options for someone whose testing ability would put them into school. It should never be out of reach of them simply because of the money, even if that means we need to find work programs that they will will use in their college education. Alternatives like the Peace Corps, like ROTC, like those programs, so that we can ensure that there's supplemental income. But let's get back to the real issue, that socioeconomic equality, which starts at primary education and is not still being addressed.
Thank you, Mr. Haller. Mr. Landsman?
Well, David, it's an excellent question. The reality is the kids graduating from college today are graduating not only with a degree, but a mountain of debt. It's like having a mortgage and no house to show for it. I was fortunate to attend Queens College and was able to graduate without any debt. And the rise in the rate of tuition has, since the early days, 80s, risen greater than the rate of inflation. And one of the things that we did do in New York, for SUNY and CUNY at least, was stabilize tuition increases so that they were predictable and reasonable. And in the course of my campaign, I think we've done 10 or 11 issue-oriented press conferences. And the first one that we did was at my alma mater, at Queens College, on the issue of college affordability. So here's my three-part plan, and I'm shamelessly stealing much of it from the president's own plan. The first is, soon the interest rates on federally backed student loans are going to double. We need to extend that law so that doesn't happen, and that kids who have student loans are not going to see their interest rates go through the roof. They already have enough debt. Second, the president has said that we ought to tie federal aid to colleges to them reducing the rate of inflation of tuition. That's an enormous hammer that we have. That's an enormous stick, and we need as a federal government to be wielding it. And finally, we need to make colleges fully disclose the true cost of their education, tuition fees, etc.
Thank you, Mr. Landsman.
Kids can make informed decisions.
Thank you. Ms. May?
Just to give everyone a clear picture of how much student debt is owed in the United States, it's about $850 billion, which surpasses that of credit card debt. So we have students here, and I was proud to be the first candidate in this congressional election to call for Congress to extend legislation necessarily to prevent our student loan interest rates from doubling from 3.4, and it'll become 6.8 on July 1st, less than 2 months away. Investing in public higher education is one of the most important investments our state can make. And that's evidenced by President Obama's most recent trip to Albany, where he was able to literally see an amazing partnership of SUNY Albany and corporations. And that's something that invests in higher education, invests in our students, and brings jobs locally.
Thank you, Ms. May. Mr. Mittman?
Once again, also as another panelist, Roy Landsman mentioned, I'm also a Queens College graduate. And back then, it was $300 per semester. It tells you how old I am. What I do believe is we should be offering programs of tying public funding to community service. What does that mean? If a child can't afford to go to higher education, we give them options. We can't just fund it. It's skyrocketing. We don't have the money. But you have a program like Sophie Davis out of CUNY, New York. You take a program where they tie themselves in, they want to be a doctor, it's heavily funded, it costs minimal amount of money, but they're tied to a program of offering community service as a primary medical physician for 3 or 4 years. This could be extended to school teachers, sending them into school, into inner city New York City school systems. Also, we've got to redirect our thought. Not everybody should be going to college and building up debt of $100,000. Some people are good at mechanics. Some people might be good home care attendants. We should be going back in high schools and trying to spend more time focusing on where a child should be, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, and just not start sending everybody to college. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mittman. Mr. Cho?
As I stated in my opening, free CUNY tuition, the act it was in 1975. We talk about investing in our future. Who is more our future than the children, than the young men and women who actually found a way to go to college? Saddle them with a huge debt. Like Roy Landsman said, a mortgage without a house is cruel, inhumane, and criminal. Look at the housing crisis. We have Wall Street and the banks playing with our people's lives. Your aspiration to own a home and just for rate mortgage, credit for swap. Now you swindle out of a house. Now look at education. I want you to think carefully. It is the same Wall Street and big banks that are lending out these loans. Why is it that we will allow them to make so much money off our suffering? So I say, we have long-term, those that want to go to City College, it's free. Those that want to go to other private institutions, we have long-term, low-interest loans. I mean long-term, low-interest loans so that you're able to come out. And right now the economy is depressed. So for many of these college students, not only is it saddled with a huge debt, without the Green New Deal, they do not even have a job to work at. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cho. Ms. Crowley?
I support public education from pre-kindergarten to graduate school. I believe that everybody should have the opportunity to obtain a higher education degree, to go to college. Some people may not be ready for college, but this day and age, most jobs are requiring a minimum of a 2-year degree, an associate's degree. I wouldn't be sitting here today if it weren't for government programs that supported higher education. I went to a state university. I qualified for both Pell and CAP grants. I think it's important to maintain those the government level of funding in those types of grants, and if not maintain it, at least look at ways to expand upon it. It is so important for elected officials to keep city and state universities accessible to kids graduating from our high schools. It costs nearly $20,000 a year to send a child to a state university to room and board and pay tuition. That's not affordable. Like many of the parents in Queens, I have 2 kids in high school, and it's very difficult to think of how I'm going to afford their college education. And, I'm pushing my children to think of city universities as I did. And we are very fortunate to have very, very good city universities. But if they do choose to take out loans, it is important to maintain that the interest rate stays low on those loans.
Thank you, Ms. Crowley. Thank you, Ms. Crowley. We're going to move on to the last question from our panel. We're going to Ms. Gomez-Jimenez. She's going to ask a question about civil rights.
Given the diversity of this Queens district, the issue of race is one that arises often and in many contexts. Some of your constituents claim that government policies should be race blind, and that acknowledging race detracts from seeing everyone as simply people or Americans. Others believe that race and racial discrimination is simply a reality and must be addressed in some way. What do you believe, and what would you say to the claim that race is no longer an important issue?
We're going to start with Mr. Lansman.
Can I just add to that, Steve?
Sure.
Sorry, because I think it's related. Because related to that question is, how do you look at racial profiling within our local context, whether it's in the context of stop and frisk or Muslim surveillance issues? Because I think part of the race question is there any legitimacy? Do you believe that race, religion, ethnicity should be a factor in law enforcement going after or targeting certain communities?
Well, let me break the news to anyone who might think otherwise, but we do not live in a post-racial society. Race, religion, gender, ethnicity, unfortunately, plays a significant role in the opportunities that children have, in the chances that adults have, whether it's employment or education, or even serving on a jury. Before I was elected to the Assembly, I was a lawyer who represented people who had been discriminated against in the workplace because of their race, religion, sex, sexual orientation. It's an issue I take very, very seriously, and it's been one of the focuses of my work in the State Assembly. I passed legislation which requires the courts to collect data on the racial and ethnic demographics of people who report for jury duty to make sure that if any of us are ever in a court case, civil or criminal, that we are tried by a jury of our peers. That law passed and is now having an impact in our state court system. So civil rights is something that all of us as potential members of Congress need to take very, very seriously. And in particular, whether or not the city's stop and frisk policies, whether it's a program of surveilling Muslim communities, are appropriate and responsible and within the law. I have grave questions about our stop and frisk policies. Let me surprise no one in this room. I've never been stopped and frisked. I wonder why that is. But 500,000, primarily men of color, are stopped every year, detained by their government, questioned, for not doing anything wrong. That's a civil rights
Thank you,
issue we
Mr.
should all be
Mansman.
concerned about.
Thank you. Ms. May?
I want to emphasize how important it is for our society to promote opportunity, and it's never just about the outcome. Until a lot of our massive disparities between people of different incomes and people of different colors are resolved, this is something that is a reality that our society has to address. That's why I am a member of Governor Cuomo's Minority and Women Business Enterprise Team, to increase opportunities for business owners who are owned by women and minorities. That's why I'm involved in the analysis of why some of our specialized high schools don't have enough members of various communities. In terms of stop and frisk and NYPD surveillance, what's most important is that no one community should ever be singled out or targeted because of the way they look, because of who they believe in, and because of where they came from. So it's important that we continue to strengthen and to build bridges between specific communities and the NYPD. That's the best way to make sure that our communities are safe. And so I'm going...
Thank you, Ms. May. Mr. Mittman?
As with the other panelists, I'm against racial profiling, and it needs to be taken seriously. No single group should be singled out as a threat, but we do have to remember that in the instance of our safety and our protection, we do have to be careful, and there is a fine line. Recently, we're all aware that the Congress passed attempted to pass a law that would have removed funding from New York based on the fact of the New York Police Department's actions in racial profiling Muslims. We have to be very careful. We have to act cautiously. Racial profiling is bad, but we also have to act in a manner that protects the citizens of this city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mittman. Mr. Cho?
Yes, we're definitely not post-racial. Oftentimes it's about race, but I think also oftentimes class has a lot to do with it. The NYPD, as they stop and frisk racial profile, is really wrong. It's Mayor, Commissioner Kelly, they have to put a stop to it. If not, as you know, there's many marches, rallies that are in support of the people and for us to rise up. Maybe when they see the people power, as in Occupy Wall Street, as the May Day March, then maybe perhaps Bloomberg or Kelly will get a sense that, wow, the people are upset. We're going to have to tone it down. Perhaps making the police force more racially diverse, make them live in the neighborhoods they serve, giving them a sense of, maybe if you never go to a black neighborhood, you might not be able to tell the drug dealer from the young kid that just, with an honor student. You can't really tell. And also, I go back to race again, let's say we go to the economically depressed neighborhood, there's no community center, they cannot afford the YMCA swimming program, they cannot afford the ballet program, the after school prep club, the kids are just on the streets with nothing. If the college students are unemployed, you can imagine these young Hispanic black kids, and many of them now Asian now. So we have to, it's about class and bringing it to a racial consciousness. We hope to feel that, we can appreciate each other based on our class. But then, right now, they target the Muslim community, and oftentimes, it's not just targeting, it's entrapment. They go to
Thank you, Mr. Cho. Thank you. Ms. Crowley?
One of our greatest assets in Queens County that sets us apart more so than any other place in the world are the various different cultures that live and work together in such harmony that we have on an average day. Unfortunately, there are sometimes when incidents of hate happen, and I have no tolerance for hate. One of the programs that I'm most proud of that we started in the City Council was a Respect for All Week, and we bring that into elementaries and middle schools so kids could understand that it's good to be different, and that it's not nice to make fun of somebody based on their ethnic background or based on their gender or sexual orientation. And I think we need to start with our kids and teaching them tolerance and respect for all. And the beauty in our borough and the beauty of diversity that we have here is really our greatest strength. I've always, I know that many of my opponents have spoke about stop and frisk, and I think firmly right now in the city of New York, we are so understaffed in our police department. Everybody wants to make sure that crime stays low and that we remain the safest big city in the country. However, it's hard to do that with 7,000 fewer police officers today. And I believe that our police officers are practicing defensive policing and that they're not all racially profiling or stop and frisking just people based on the color of their skin.
Thank you, Ms. Crowley.
Many
Thank you.
police officers.
Thank you, Ms. Crowley. Mr. Halloran, please.
Well, first let me say that I don't know at what point you draw the line between saying that race matters in terms of the help up versus we should be a colorblind society. I think that that's something that sociologists don't agree on, and so certainly they do far more studies than I've done. But I will say this. There is far more of a correlation between economics and socio-status than there is directly upon race, because you will find, at least by most of the major components, that whether you're black and white in certain neighborhoods, those instances in stop and frisks are relatively proportional. And that's unfortunate, because it does seem that there is a component of which that has to do with the socioeconomic demographic of the location, and disproportionately that socioeconomic group is a minority, whether that's black, Hispanic, less so in the Asian population. However, our police department is, as Liz quite correctly points out, 7,000 police officers lower than it was when Rudy Giuliani left office before 9/11. We find ourselves in an increasingly more media-conscious set of spotlights. Our department has the most diverse department in the country. Sensitivity training is going on. Is it enough? No, it's not. I was an 18B attorney. I defended indigent people for almost 9 years. I've done my Huntley, Wade, and Dunaway hearings all over the place. I know there's an issue.
Thank you,
It's
Mr.
fixing
Howard.
it, that's the issue.
Thank you. So we are now done with the panel questions, and we are moving on to the audience questions. Question number 1. President Obama announced last week that he supports same-sex marriage. Do you support same-sex marriage, and would you move to repeal the Defense of Marriage Act if you were elected? We will start that with Ms. May.
Marriage equality is a civil rights issue for me, and yes, I would support the repeal of DOMA.
Mr. Mittman?
I don't believe it's a federal issue. It should remain in the hands of the states. There's an issue also, if you look at France, in a country, they separate the two issues apart. First, you get married in a civil union, and then, if you so desire, you go to a church, a synagogue, a mosque, and you get the word marriage tagged on. There's no question that gay and lesbians have equal rights under the law. They should be able to get insurance. They should be able to have all the benefits of marriage. The question is marriage, when it offends the church, synagogues, and mosques, the correct word to be used? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mittman. Mr. Joe?
I personally support same-sex marriage, and I also believe it should be a state issue. And I also agree with Mr. Mittman that, there's certain religious groups that might look at it differently. So I don't think it's correct so that, we pass a federal law now. People can walk into a synagogue, a mosque, a church, and say, well, I want to be married, I want to be recognized here. So they should definitely enjoy the benefits of the civil union, all the benefits that come with that, and also let's tie it back to social economic justice. I think right now the attack on the woman is just more than this one issue of whether they can get married or not. Rather, really, it's about everything that I said. It's about a living wage job. It's about housing that's affordable. It's about health care. When you're stressed over other things, and then you cannot live in this society. Thank you.
Once again, I'm going to direct the candidates to please answer the question, do you support same-sex marriage, and would you vote to repeal the Defense of Marriage Act? Ms. Crowley?
Yes and yes. I support marriage equality, and I would support repealing the DOMA Act. Except I do believe right now in New York State, it is a law, but in many states it's not. And I think it's going to be a while before the whole country gets on board. However, I do firmly believe that in time, America will come to give people, regardless of their sexual orientation, the right to love who they love and marry who they love. And so, in time, I think we'll achieve that. But for now, I support what's happening here in New York State.
Thank you. Mr. Halloran?
Well, first of all, I don't support the notion that DOMA is not necessary right now. There are states that have voted by referendum not to accept calling the union between a man and a man and a woman and a woman a marriage. And I believe every state has the right to make that determination as a moral issue. Do I believe that in the state of New York, when we had a civil union issue, that there's any problem with that? No, I don't. But by the same token, I think we need to take a step back and realize that the fundamental problem here is two components. One is that the government is involved in marriage, and the government shouldn't be. There should be no involvement by our government in calling something a marriage. If people want to register their partnership, and however we look at it, contract law is what I think applies, and I think you're free to contract with whoever you'd like. That's the civil libertarian in me. However, the other side of the coin is we should not be imposing on our traditional institutions the notion that they have some compulsory need to conform to a desire for people for a word. And that's the problem. We've turned marriage and its ratification by the state into something far more important than the actual issues that underlie it. And that's, I think, where the twist has taken place. Marriage is an institution, as many Catholics and Orthodox Jewish people have pointed out, is a long-standing tradition to protect the inheritance rights of a child. The government got involved. Whenever the government gets involved in anything, it messes it up.
Thank you. Mr. Landsman? Please restrict all applause to the end. Thank you.
Halloran supports the abolition of marriage?
The government sanction of marriage.
I supported marriage equality in the legislature, voted for it, was a co-sponsor of it, and support the repeal of the Defense of Marriage Act. This is a very simple issue. It's a basic civil rights question. Whatever rights, benefits, privileges that the government affords to one group of people, it needs to afford to all groups of people, and that's true of states as well. States are going to recognize the laws that are duly enacted in other states. They need to recognize all of those laws. And the fact that it's a civil rights question is really the end of the discussion for me. And it is no different than the question of whether or not an individual walking on the street should be stopped by the police because of their race or ethnicity. It's no different from whether or not someone should be fired or hired based on their religion or sexual orientation. It's no different from whether or not a woman should have the right to make decisions of her own on her reproductive health, her right to choice, whether or not she should have her health care choices dictated to her by her employer. It is simply a basic civil rights issue.
Thank you. We have another question from the audience, and the question is, what are your views on the financial turmoil in the Eurozone and its potential impact on markets in the United States? We're going to start with Mr. Mitt.
Well, once again, Arizona has numerous problems, overbuilding, housing markets. We also have a large amount of resources being spent on federal issues, which includes immigration, which I really believe should stay in the hands of the federal government, and the cost should be held by the federal government. The states have to be more fiscally responsible and spend money that they have and act accordingly.
Okay. Mr. Joe, I'll ask the question again. What are your views on the financial turmoil in the Eurozone and its potential impact on markets in the United States?
What's happening in Europe, it's a sign of what to come in the United States if we don't adopt certain changes. Right now, employment is high, they cannot create jobs, it's all about austerity, restructuring the debt. And unfortunately, as a Green, this is not, if I had a chance to run in Europe, I would say the same thing over there. You spend out of a depression. You cannot just keep cutting and cutting. The record unemployment, you've got to create jobs. Again, going back to FDR and the New Deal. It's right now, many Democrats, they cannot see that happen. Republicans, they were against it from the beginning. You create jobs. The young people that are in the streets, what are they saying? They want a job, So the government, I believe the government's job, publicly financed job. They don't have money for health care. Well, the health care job, affordable housing, and then the prices will go away. But unfortunately, the Greens are not in control. I'm not in control right now. It's about more police, more crackdown, austerity, and get ready for the cuts.
Thank you. Ms. Crowley.
I worry about the European Union and the current state of their economy. I would encourage a country like Germany to help its neighbors, to help them put together a plan where they could start to prosper economically, and part of that has to do with spending. We benefited from a stimulus package put in place here in the U.S. We weathered through the worst economic downturn in our history, in our generation's history, since the Great Depression, and they're experiencing a serious depression, and they need to start investing in their resources, in their people, in their infrastructure, and the strength and our surgeons here in America depends heavily on what happens in Europe. So when people are working there, they're using American companies to do work as well, and so we need to keep our partnership strong, and I hope that things will turn around for Europe.
Thank you. Mr. Halloran?
Okay, first of all, the reason that Europe is in crisis right now is because they started spending money they didn't have, and then they continue to spend money they didn't have. Greece has now gone to bailouts on 4 separate occasions, and they won't accept the fact that they need to cut back. They continue to encourage entitlement programs in Italy, in Portugal, in Spain, and in Greece. And all of those programs have caused, record turmoil and the requirement for the German government to bail them out. The German government still maintains the Deutschmark as a secondary currency for a reason, because they don't trust the euro. And the reason they don't trust it is because only Germany has exhibited the kind of discipline required in their spending to be able to weather these economic crises. Now, the other component to the problem is every government in Europe is left of center. They are all socialists. And as Maggie Thatcher once said, the problem with socialism is sooner or later you run out of somebody else's money. And that's the problem. They run out of everybody else's money but Germany's. And very soon, Germany's not going to give them any more. And when that happens, and Europe devolves and the euro breaks up, there are going to be significant economic impacts in the United States, felt not just because of banking and lending, but because of the unemployment and the effects that will have on the European nations themselves. It will destabilize so much that we've built. We need to take a lesson from that and stop spending a $17 trillion national debt, which is coupled with an even as large trade deficit debt that we have.
Thank you. Mr. Landsman?
Well, a political debate is not a political debate unless someone gets the opportunity to quote Daniel Patrick Moynihan's admonition that one is entitled to their own opinion but not their own facts. And the facts are that the countries in Europe that are now contracting and going through the most political turmoil are the ones who most slavishly observe the kind of austerity that we see Republicans advocating in Washington, Greece, Italy, Spain. These countries and others in Ireland were forced to adopt severely austere programs to cut, and as a result, their economies contracted, they continue to bring in less revenue, and now those countries, their democratic process, their populations have elected left-of-center governments. We saw in France that the right-of-center President Nicolas Sarkozy was replaced by Mr. Hollande. The only way for a country to get out of the cycle of debt is through growth. Right? We have seen it in Europe. We have seen that the countries that have adhered to austerity with the kind of religious fervor and conviction that we see Republicans adhere to have gone in the wrong direction. And I caution all of us that what is happening in Europe is very, very dangerous to the United States. If Europe goes under, if Europe continues to contract, if the Eurozone breaks up, it's going to have very significant impacts on our economy, none of them good.
Thank you. Ms. Meng?
I think, all of us are concerned about what's happening in Europe, and what's most important to remember, whether they're the families in Europe or future families in America, that when you're cutting services and cutting basic human services for people's needs, that you're cutting services for these very same families. And so, I agree with some of my opponents where it's important in this case to focus on job and economic growth and fiscal responsibility, but not to cut essential human services.
Thank you. And so now we are going to finish with the questions, and it is now time for closing statements. So once again, you'll have the opportunity to speak for 2 minutes, and we are going to start with Mr. Cho. Mr. Cho.
This country right now needs a new Green Deal. Why? Because just as mentioned earlier, we want the social safety net. Many in our government believe that it has to cut the social safety net. Not only do I want to increase it, we're asking for a new Green Deal of building affordable housing, mixed income housing, of having free CUNY, therefore you generate more schools, more universal health care. You want to have more jobs added to the economy, living wage jobs, jobs that that you can pay your rent with. And oftentimes you ask, where's all this money coming from? Again, the Green Party, as a party of peace, are asking to stop the war. Imagine the billions that it's spending for wars now routed to the economy. For a country to have safe defense, I believe 10% is all that's needed to be spent. Right now, we have stockpiled so much nuclear weapons, military weapons, that I do not need any more jets and fighters and bombs. And also, in ending, I would just like to say, let's take that concept, too big to fail. Do not let Wall Street and the bank tell us it's only the banks that's too big to fail. It is this library, it is our school, it is our hospital, it is our post office, it is our student loan debt that's too big to fail. We must have a policy that goes in and realize that the need of Main Street must overcome the greed of Wall Street. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Crowley?
I'm running to represent you in Congress, to take the passion that I've had in my job as a city council member to Washington. That belief in our middle class families, that American dream that we all still believe in, that we're working hard. I've lived it, and I believe that we can all still achieve it, and I will fight for that in Washington. I have a different history than many of the people up here on the panel. I came from a very large family. I'm one of 15 children, born the 14th. When I was young, my dad died, and my mother relied heavily on Social Security. Right now, so many seniors are worried about what's happening with Social Security and the threat of privatizing. I have a plan to protect Social Security, to make sure that our seniors who work so hard are able to retire gracefully and not have to worry about their health care. I will go to Washington to protect Social Security and Medicare. Out of college, I was able to even go to college because of city and state universities being affordable and having the opportunity to take out student loans. Those same student loans that are in jeopardy today. I worked on construction sites. I learned quick how important it is to work, to receive fair pay for the work that you did. After September 11th, I worked with many businesses and helped them stay open and help thousands of people keep their jobs. As a mother with 2 kids, I worry deeply about the future of their education. As a council member, I've built new schools in my district. I help keep firehouses open. Public safety is a very important issue that we can't take for granted today. We need to make sure that we send a representative to Washington that's going to bring back the resources to protect our homeland security, and one that understands job growth and bringing our troops back from Afghanistan and using the resources that we're spending over here to make our country stronger so we can create jobs.
Thank you, Ms. Crowley. Mr. Haller.
Well, first, let me say that Liz and I do have a lot in common. My father died when I was very young, and I'm from a big Irish family. I think that's the common denominator there. Look, everyone on this panel has worked in some way, shape, or form very hard, either in the community as a business owner or for their community afterwards. I went into politics long after my career in the police department, my career as a prosecutor, my career as a defense attorney, as someone who owned a business on Bell Boulevard, who worked for the Boy Scouts, who worked for St. Andrew Avellino Church for about 8 years. I've been in the private sector, I've been in the public sector. I've gone to public schools and private schools. I went to CUNY, Queens College as well. Did work there. I was at Fordham University, St. John's University for my law degree, and SUNY Buffalo for my LLM. I understand what it is to be part of this community. I've owned a home. I've been in foreclosure on that home, as the Times has pointed out. I've spent my time being a part of this community as my family has for 5 generations. Nuts and bolts life in Queens is never going to be simple. Part of the problem is government. The government is in the way. It's in the way of our small businesses. It's in the way of our citizens who take home a paycheck and half of it is gone because of taxes. And then they go to the store and they get to spend another 10% in taxes as well. That's not stimulating the economy. The only thing it's stimulating is our debt reliance and the national issues which we've all talked about. National safety has to be at the top of the heap. We need to protect our borders, we need to protect our allies, and we need to be sure that where technology is moving forward, we're moving forward with it. We don't need to put out of work the soldiers, the sailors, the airmen, and the technological teams that are behind them. But by the same token, we need to turn them to more productive uses. Gas and energy prices, I don't have to tell you what $4 a gallon gas looks like, you know it. This was a president who criticized the former president as being an oil tycoon when gas hit $3 a gallon. But that rhetoric changed, of course, when it was him, and $4 was looking like $5. So we need to be realistic in our policies, and we need citizen politicians. I agree with Dr. Mittman wholeheartedly in that regard.
Thank you. Mr. Landsman?
Well, first let me say thank you to the MinKwon Center for hosting this event, along with the other co-hosts and the panelists, and of course my colleagues in this race. Everything that I am and have become is a product of 2 things. A mother who loved me and devoted her life to my upbringing and well-being, and the kind of democratic policies and programs that enabled me to live in New York City in a rent-stabilized apartment, to go to good public schools, to go to Queens College, the city's University of New York, to serve my country in the military, and to be an active civic leader in my community. And everything that I've done in my life as a political leader, as a civic leader, as a father of 3 children, I've done in gratitude and respect for what this country has given me, and for the hope that I could, in some small way, contribute to every American, every resident of Queens and the United States in having that same opportunity. The opportunity to achieve your full potential. The opportunity for my kids, my son Jonathan, my 2 daughters, Gail and Laura Hannah, for them to be able to go to good schools, to be able to get an education, to be able to live their life in freedom and prosperity. And so they don't get trapped in that cycle where kids born to the middle income bracket in our country, more of them go down the economic ladder rather than up. You know, fortunately, this country has given me everything that I needed to succeed in my life. We need to send people to Washington who have that same perspective and that same background, and most importantly, have a record of success in being a forceful advocate for the things that matter for working people. I really appreciate the questions that I got from the panel tonight and the ones from the audience. These are the issues that matter most to us in Queens, and those are the ones we're going to fight for if I get the chance to be your representative in Washington come January. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. May?
I'm running for Congress today, and I'm here today because of my parents' American dream, a generation that exists in every one of our families here today. Parents that came to the United States so that we can have a better education and a better chance of our career. I'm running for Congress so that every child in Queens can live that same American dream. I've spent my career being a voice for the voiceless, and the voiceless of today is our middle class. As a mom who is about to send one of her kids to public schools this fall, I'm fighting to make sure that our schools have better resources from the federal government. As a granddaughter, I'm running to make sure that we're able to protect Social Security and Medicare and to increase funding for senior citizens' affordable housing here in Queens. And most importantly to me, as a woman, I'm running to make sure that the woefully inadequate statistic of 17% of women in Congress changes. And that's a big part of the reason for so many of the policies that are against our working families, our seniors, and our children. And most importantly, I'm running to restore your trust in our Congress and in our government. Thank you so much to the sponsoring organizations, to my fellow colleagues on the panel, and also to our panelists for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you. Mr. Midman?
Yes. I want to thank the MinKwon Center again, Queens Public Library, for being a gracious host in this candidates forum. As I said in my opening, I am not a career politician. I'm a kid from Bayside that became a doctor and stayed right here in the community I was born and raised in. I serve the community, my friends and neighbors. Serving the community has always been my #1 priority. You know, the vacancy for the 6th Congressional District is a rare opportunity for people from Queens to run and to elect a new congressman or congresswoman. I welcome the fact that my opponents are running. This is part of the process in our representative democracy. But as I said earlier, my campaign is very, very different from the campaigns of my opponents. They're all career politicians with special interest money supporting them. I'll answer only to you, the people. Quite frankly, I'm running because the system is broken and in desperate need of repair. We only need to change we need to change the course and elect new hands to create jobs, ensure that no hospitals are closed and residents receive adequate medical care. To never allow bailout for the bankers and put our people out of their homes. To save and protect Social Security is priority. To make sure that patients and their doctors make medical decisions, not insurance companies, and most importantly, not Washington insiders. These politicians will bring us more of the same. If you feel that our nation and our current state of the great borough of Queens are going in the right direction, vote for any one of them. But if you feel we should change the course and elect new members of Congress that has an allegiance only to the community he represents, to you the people, and not to the lobbyists, fat cats, political bosses, and the other special interests, then I ask for your support, and please vote on June 26th. I thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Midman. And with that, I'd like to thank all the candidates, Mr. Evergreen Powell, Mr. Elizabeth Crowley, Mr. Dan Howland, Mr. Roy Lansman, Grace Mann, Mr. Robin Mitchell. Please give a round of applause also to the panelists as well. And a reminder, please return your headsets to the desk in front. And if you have not registered to vote, you must register by June 1st. And again, the primary election is on June 26th. Thank you to everybody again.